The hatred between Israel and Iran did not begin with missiles, politics, or modern borders. It began in a family. Long before there was an Israelite state or a Persian empire, there was one man called Abraham, one promise from God, and a chain of choices that split bloodlines, nations, and loyalties for centuries. This is not just a story of war. It is the story of how a family fracture became a regional fault line and why the Middle East still trembles over it today. Before there was an Israelite state or a Persian empire, there was a man living in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram's story begins in the cradle of Mesopotamia, near the same great eastern world that would later produce the empire surrounding Israel. The conflict we're tracing doesn't start on a battlefield. It starts in a household. Then God speaks, "Leave your country, your family, and your father's house." One command sends Abram walking out of Mesopotamia toward Canaan. That journey is more than migration. It is the first crack in a future world. The man who walks away from Ur will become the center point of bloodlines that shape the Middle East for millennia. In the land of Canaan, God gives Abram a promise that changes everything: land, descendants, and blessing for all nations. Under a sky full of stars, the future of Israel is spoken into existence. But that same promise also creates pressure, because every family decision from this point on will happen under the weight of covenant. But the promise feels slow, and human impatience opens the first wound. Sarai gives Hagar, her Egyptian servant, to Abram, and Ishmael is born. He is loved, blessed, and multiplied, but he is not the covenant line. From here, Abraham's family begins to split before the world even knows its name. Then comes Isaac, the child of promise, born when hope looked biologically impossible. This is where the biblical line of Israel is narrowed. God blesses Ishmael, but he binds covenant to Isaac. From this point on, Abraham's house is no longer one family walking one road. It is one family becoming multiple futures. Eventually, Hagar and Ishmael are sent away into the wilderness. That moment matters. One branch of Abraham's house bends south and east, away from the covenant center. Ishmael's descendants will spread through the deserts and trade routes of Arabia. Another branch remains tied to the promise in Canaan. The split is now geographic, not just emotional. But Ishmael is not the only eastern branch. After Sarah's death, Abraham fathers more sons through Keturah. Genesis says he sends them eastward to the east country. That line is often forgotten, but it matters. Abraham's house does not only divide into Israel and Arabs, it also throws roots deeper into the eastern world. Then the promised line itself fractures again. Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau, struggle from the womb and grow into rival destinies. Jacob becomes Israel. Esau becomes Edom. That matters because later enemies of Israel, including Amalek and Haman the Agagite, flow from Esau's side of the family tree. The fracture deepens. Esau's line later produces Amalek, the first nation to attack Israel after the Exodus. That matters because when we eventually get to Persia, a man named Haman is called an Agagite, tying him back to Amalek's royal line. So the hostility we see in the Persian court doesn't begin in Persia. Persia becomes the stage where a much older family hatred gets new power. And here is the key most videos miss. Modern Iran is not simply Ishmael. Iran grows out of the ancient Persian world, Elam, Media, Persia, not directly from Abraham's sons. But Abraham's fractured family story and the rise of Persia eventually collide in one empire. That's where our story is heading next. For centuries, Israel and the Eastern world circle each other at a distance. Then everything changes. Assyria crushes the northern kingdom, and later Babylon tears Judah out of its land and drags its people east. Suddenly, Abraham's covenant line is no longer only in Canaan. It is living, weeping, and surviving inside the same Eastern world that will soon become Persia. Then history swings hard. Babylon falls in a single night, and the Medes and Persians rise. This is the moment the story tightens. The descendants of Abraham are now living under the power of the empire that grew in the eastern highlands. The biblical fault line between Israel and the Iranian world is no longer distant. They are now inside the same political house. And here's the twist most people never expect. The first great Persian king, Cyrus, becomes a blessing to Israel. He allows the Jews to return, rebuild Jerusalem, and restore the temple. So the Bible's first major encounter between Israel and Persia is not missiles or hatred. It is unexpected favor. That matters because it proves the conflict was never Israel versus Persians by nature. It was always about covenant, loyalty, and whoever resisted God's people. Not every Jew goes home. Thousands stay behind in the Persian Empire, in Susa, in Babylon, in the eastern cities. They build lives, businesses, families, and synagogues there. That means by the time you reach Esther, the Jewish story is no longer only a Jerusalem story. It is also a diaspora story inside the empire that stands behind modern Iran. Now the conflict moves from genealogy and geography into the royal court. In Susa, a Jewish exile named Mordecai raises his orphan cousin Hadassah Esther. By a chain of political events, she becomes queen of Persia. A daughter of Abraham's people is now hidden in the center of the Persian palace, right where the next wave of hatred is about to break. Then the old hatred gets a face. Haman enters the story, an Agagite. That title matters. Agag was the kingly line of Amalek, and Amalek came from Esau's side of the family. Suddenly, the House of Persia becomes the stage where an ancient family grudge from Abraham's descendants rises again, now wearing imperial robes and royal authority. When everyone in the court bows to Haman, Mordecai will not. This is more than bad manners. It is the collision of two lines, the covenant people refusing to submit to a man carrying the old spirit of Amalek. Haman's pride is wounded, and like many tyrants, he decides one man's refusal must be answered by destroying an entire people. Haman goes to the king and asks for permission to exterminate the Jews across the empire. And that is the moment Persia stops being merely the land east of Abraham and becomes a weapon in the old family war. The imperial machine laws, couriers, seals, provinces is turned against the covenant people of God. At this point, the issue is no longer abstract. Persia has a legal plan to wipe out the Jews, and the only person close enough to the throne to stop it is Esther. A Jewish woman hidden in the royal house of the Eastern Empire becomes the hinge of the whole story. The ancient hatred has reached the very center of power. So now we can finally say it carefully. The biblical origin of hatred between Israel and what would become Iran does not mean modern Iranians are Moab or Amalek. It means the Eastern imperial world became the stage where Abraham's fractured family, Esau's hostility, and Persia's power collided. Today's conflict is modern, yes, but the emotional and spiritual fault lines under it are ancient. When the decree goes out, Mordecai sends Esther a line that shakes the whole book. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The conflict is no longer just political. A Jewish woman inside a Persian palace is now standing at the point where family history, empire power, and divine purpose collide. Esther doesn't rush straight into action. She calls for 3 days of fasting. That matters. Before confronting Persia's throne, she bows to the throne above it. In the Bible, real courage is rarely reckless. It is born in prayer, sharpened by hunger, and steadied in surrender. Persian law is brutal. Enter the king's inner court uninvited, and you die unless he extends the golden scepter. Esther puts on royal robes, but beneath the silk, she is carrying a sentence in her chest. If I perish, I perish. The daughter of Abraham walks toward death, hoping for mercy. And then Esther does something unexpected. She delays. Instead of blurting out the accusation, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet, then another one. It isn't fear, it's precision. The woman in the palace is moving like a strategist, letting the trap close one piece at a time. That same night, the king can't sleep, so he asks for the royal chronicles, and the forgotten report about Mordecai saving his life is read aloud. What looked like a dead detail earlier in the story suddenly wakes up. In the Bible, providence often sounds like insomnia. By morning, the empire starts eating itself. Haman arrives, planning Mordecai's execution, and instead is told to robe him, parade him, and publicly honor him. The descendant of Amalek is made to lift up the Jew he wanted dead. Heaven has a way of turning the knife before the sentence even lands. At the second banquet, Esther stops speaking in riddles. She names the target, names the crime, and then names the man. We have been sold, I and my people, and the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. In one breath, the hidden Jewess unmasks the old hatred sitting beside Persia's throne. Haman is executed on the very gallows he built for Mordecai. It's one of the Bible's sharpest reversals. The trapper is trapped, the sentence circles back, and the man who tried to erase the covenant line hangs from his own machinery of death. Old hatred climbs its own scaffold. So where does this leave us? The modern state conflict between Israel and Iran is not a simple replay of one Bible verse. But beneath today's politics lies an older memory. Abraham's family split, Esau's hostility, Amalek's violence, and Persia's power, all crossing in the same story. The missiles are modern. The emotional fault lines under them are ancient. At this point, we need precision. Ancient Persia is not identical to the modern Islamic Republic of Iran. The land overlaps. Some cultural memory overlaps. But history does not move in a straight line. If you simply say Persia equals Iran, therefore every modern conflict is just Esther all over again, you will miss as much as you understand. Still, old fault lines matter. Civilizations remember. Sacred texts shape identity. Stories of exile, empire, and survival get passed down through prayer, politics, and pain. So, when modern Israel and Iran face each other with suspicion, they are not acting inside a vacuum. The ground under them is layered with older memories. The Bible shows something deeper than one national rivalry. Hatred mutates. In one generation, it is Amalek in the wilderness. In another, it is Haman in the palace. In another, it becomes an empire, a law, a slogan, or a missile. The clothing changes. The spirit of hostility remains. That means we need to be careful. You cannot take Abraham's fractured family story and use it as a permission slip to hate modern Iranians, Arabs, or Jews. That would betray the whole point. The Bible traces the roots of conflict so we can understand sin honestly, not so we can baptize our tribal anger with holy language. Remember the first promise God gave Abraham: in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Not just one branch, not just one side of the family war. The same Abraham whose household split into rival lines was also given a promise that stretched beyond those fractures. Israel matters in that promise, but so do the nations around her. And if we're being fair to the Bible, Persia is not only the place of threat, it is also the place of return. Through Cyrus, God opens the way for temple rebuilding. Through Esther, he preserves the Jews. Through the East, he repeatedly shows that even empires can become instruments in his hand. That matters when people flatten Iran's biblical role into only darkness. The deepest answer to Israel, Iran, Ishmael, Esau, Persia, exile, and all the rest is not found in one more geopolitical chart. It is found in the Messiah. Jesus does what Abraham's household never could. He creates one new family from hostile lines. He does not erase history, he redeems it. So what does this mean today? It means modern conflict in the Middle East has political, military, economic, and ideological causes. But underneath that, Scripture teaches us to see older currents too: family wounds, inherited fears, ancient identities, and spiritual hostility. If you only read the news, you miss the roots. If you only read the roots, you miss the modern complexity. Behind states, flags, and armies is always the older war the Bible names so clearly: truth against lies, covenant against rebellion, blessing against the will to curse. That older battle can use nations, but it is never limited to them. And if we miss that, we'll misread both the Bible and the headlines. In the end, the biblical origin of hatred between Israel and Iran is not one simple bloodline equation. It is the story of Abraham's fractured house, rival descendants, hostile memory, empire power, and God's stubborn refusal to let hatred write the final line. The family split was real. The fault line is still trembling, but the promise to Abraham was always bigger than the fracture. Through his line, God meant to bless the nations, not destroy them.